entrepreneurship isn't for everyone, right? Like should be for us like weirdos. It shouldn't just be because you saw a video online about business and think you should start a business. It's not for everyone, right? There's a lot of benefits to having a job and having employment and doing all those things, right? But if you are going to go down that path, it is incredible, right? And you can do it.
Step into the world of success with your brand amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success. I am so thrilled to have Jeremy Shapiro on the show. Jeremy, your energy alone has got me so pumped up for this interview and for our conversation. And I have to first say that your LinkedIn profile really stands out because you talk about yourself as so many things that people can connect with or might aspire to be, right? You're an author, a philanthropist, serial entrepreneur, advisor, investor, mastermind facilitator, and you threw in cyclist.
Yeah.
I love that. When I look at your profile, I see that for the majority of your career, you have been an entrepreneur. You've always had that as part of your essence. So I'd love to start with, were your parents entrepreneurs? Was this something you knew you were going to do? Or is this something you fell in love with, and then continued on the path?
It's funny looking back, both my parents were career educators. So growing up in that household, it was very academic focused. Though that was never really my strong suit. I was sort of, beat the drum to my own beat, as it were. And, when I found myself in college, I'd already been running a few businesses for a number of years. And I was at this really interesting crossroads, right? I had to make this decision. Do I continue on with school, right? Or do I continue growing the business? Because I was at this point where my business was about 40-ish hours a week of my time. And trying to balance that with the course load, as you can appreciate, right, is challenging. So I had a really difficult conversation and decision to make. And that was this concept of taking a semester off, right? And I thought, I'll take the semester off, deal with this little influx and bump in business, but then I'll pick it back up and go back in the fall. And if you ask my wife, she'll tell you from the moment she met me, which was shortly after that, that she knew this guy's not going back to school. And I regret to inform you in academia that I have not yet made it back 25 years later.
That's perfectly okay. I stopped going to school early in my school days to work because I had a really good job prospects. And I went back later because I wanted to, not because I felt like I had to. And now I'm gone back again because I get to study really interesting things that I can take to the classroom and because I want to continue learning, right? But you can also self-learn, as you have in your very different businesses.
Yeah, and I've loved being able to do that. But I will say, when I look back, for any of our listeners considering the similar path that I went down, the one huge thing that, I feel was missed out on almost by not, continuing that college path is that alum network you get, right? That's something you can never get the equivalent of that outside of being in the trenches with your fellow classmates and going through a degree program together. That really is valuable. And I look at folks and how valuable their alum networks are to them throughout life. And that is something I didn't get by, going this path. I'm thrilled with my choices and love that, even though that path isn't for everyone. But that is one thing to be aware of that is a valuable part of school.
Possibly the most valuable part of school, because I had 2 conversations yesterday for my podcast at USC about the value of the Trojan network. Not all schools are created equal, but there are schools that have really strong networks, and it doesn't matter if you know the person or not. I didn't go to USC, but I'm a professor there, and that lends a lot of people to reach out to me and connect, and that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But you've created your own networks.
Exactly.
So that's just as valuable. And my other network comes from podcasting. Every single guest I've had is a new person in my network that I can call when I need their expertise or when I know somebody they should connect with. So
the
it's a
Rolodex
really
is
beautiful
powerful.
thing. Yeah. So talk about your journey into now you coach, you lead masterminds. You've been doing this for a very long time, which is I can't say enough about how important coaching and groups of people who are like-minded that you can have conversations with and share the good and the bad and the ugly and, ideate with. It's invaluable. So
it's so powerful.
Yeah. So what propelled you into that work from successively, I know you were a CTO and you were a partner, but most of your resume is entrepreneur, owner, founder.
Yeah. Every single one of my businesses, from my first, 25 plus years ago to today, they've all been in the service of fellow entrepreneurs and helping them move towards what I call entrepreneurial freedom. And when we talk about that, like, it's not just the financial freedom part, like, sure, that's great. But to me, entrepreneurial freedom is defined by you getting to choose how you spend your time, right? It means you have that optionality that you could work 80 hours a week in your business if you wanted to. You could equally take 3 months off if you wanted to. And either way, that doesn't affect the income side of things, doesn't affect the business side of things, and so on, right? It means you have that choice. So the journey to there, has a number of steps. And, my businesses over the years have helped fellow business owners, entrepreneurs go from being a solopreneur to, having a real business and having an entrepreneurial freedom. So that journey is something I've done myself and also just helped many others with over the years too.
Yeah. So what does it take? What are some of the steps to get there? Because I've had businesses that have grown exponentially, but what I've ended up with is a lot of employees. A lot of like, okay, why did I decide to hire people in 5 states? And what are the tax implications? And what paperwork do I have to file? And am I getting everything done and juggling that on top of trying to run a business, service clients, all of that?
Yeah, it's funny, as we learn some of these things about ourselves, right, that we can only learn experientially. Right? Talking to a colleague or reading a book about, sort of the best practices, sometimes we got to look for that fit, right? So for me, for example, I've always had a distributed global team. For all my companies, it's, all virtual. But when we moved out to California about 20 years ago, I had that brilliant idea of opening an office, living the Silicon Valley dream, painting the walls, the company colors, and, bringing everyone in the house. And it was something that I think was good to do. But for the first time in my life, I found myself commuting in traffic, right? And then I'd get to the office, walk in, say hi to everyone, go to my office and close the door. Yeah. And then by the end of the day, I'd open the door, say goodbye to everyone and sit in traffic again. And I found myself wondering, like, what the heck we were doing. So it was a good experiment, though, and I'm glad I did that. For many companies, that is the only way they could operate. That is not what worked for me. I have clients of friends who've built up companies, much like you're talking about, with, hundreds of employees. And then their iteratively later businesses had 5. Yeah. And they were so much happier with that 5-person company and more profitable, and it was more manageable and, right? So is there a right or a wrong? Not necessarily. But what is important is we figure out what's right for us, right? And what's that good fit?
Yeah. So all of your businesses have focused on helping other entrepreneurs learn these tactics, these skills, these strategies, what works for them in their businesses. Today you have, actually since 1998, right? Structured masterminds, which probably a lot of people are not necessarily thinking of masterminds in the way that you were in 1998. Coaching, consulting, of course. So what was the impetus behind, hey, I think I need to start this as my next
the whole concept of like a mastermind. If we go back to the 30s, Napoleon Hill published one of his best known books, Think and Grow Rich, right? And in there's a chapter called The Power of the Mastermind. And this is really where this concept gets introduced to the masses at large. So if you imagine the process of you brainstorming and thinking of an idea or working on something alone in a vacuum, right, by yourself, compared to you talking with a friend or a colleague or someone and sort of spitballing these different ideas and riffing off of each other and developing this idea together, right? Those are vastly different processes. And it's not just additive. It's not like if you put 2 people in 2 separate rooms and came together, you get the same result as you get when you have more than one person working together. So this idea is when you have 2 or more minds working together in a spirit of harmony towards a common goal, you get the benefit of this created third master mind, which is the culmination of everyone there together. So fast forward to, here we are almost 100 years later, right? The way we do this nowadays is you get together like-minded folks in the room, virtually or in person, right? Working on that common goal. And so for me, for example, that comes down to entrepreneurs who are growth focused, right? Who have established existing businesses, are looking to scale and grow, right? These are lifelong learners. One of the things that we screen for heavily during our application interview process is like, what books are you reading? What courses do you take? What events do you go to? We're looking for folks who are actively growing, personally, professionally, and so on. Contrast that, by the way, with like there's some terrifying statistic that like a large double-digit percentage of Americans, the last book they read was like in school,
Yikes.
right?
Yeah.
So we're looking for the learners. We're looking
Yeah.
for the folks who actively are looking to, to grow. So that's really important, right? And so what happens when we run these meetings is, everyone has a dedicated hot seat. This is a time where we get to focus on you and your business and what's going on, and you're sharing with the group, right? What's working well, what's not working well, right? What's going on in the business and where you need help, right? So this is so valuable because when people come into the room, there's a question they have, something they're looking for an answer to. And that's usually why people are finding me, right? They're feeling stuck in their business or some challenge and they want to get unstuck, get answers and grow. But what happens is as everyone's sitting at the table, maybe waiting for their turn, right? They end up taking pages and pages of notes and have all these aha ideas and all these big pivots and shifts, not from their hot seat, but from everybody else's, because that's where everyone is sharing. That's where the conversation is happening, right? That's where people are getting to drill into what someone shared and ask the deep questions to better understand what it is that's being shared in the room. So you get the benefit of everyone else running these experiments in their businesses, right? Finding out what works, what doesn't, sharing the best practices, resources, and so on. And so that process is so powerful. From mastermind groups that I've been in and that I run, I see these pivots all the time, right? The big aha idea adds a whole new line to an existing business. That little aha idea launches an entirely new business that eclipses the business owner came into the group with, right? That's happened to me multiple times. A back of the envelope idea that you sort of talk to folks in the room around, that little idea turns into a multi-million-dollar business just from the conversations behind closed doors where you're with like-minded folks who want nothing but the best for you and who are willing to share their experiences, thoughts, feedback, and so on. It's so powerful.
Amazing. I've been in various groups like you're talking about, but some of them, I was in an incubator for, I think it was EO, for smaller businesses that weren't quite at that status. But I think because of the type of business I had and maybe the cohort I was in, I didn't really feel like there was anything that could help me. Now, I know a lot of people go through that or other mastermind programs and they're fine. So I'd love to hear, you talked a little bit about how you're vetting people, right? What are the other things that you look for that where somebody's actually going to participate fully and engage?
Yes. So that's actually, you touched on it right there, a huge piece. We want folks who are not looking to be a fly on the wall and just absorb, but are willing to ask questions, right? Are willing to challenge assumptions lovingly, right? Are willing to participate in the conversation and bring a contrarian view, if there is one. Because when we have ideas as entrepreneurs and we talk about it with our team, we often get approval and excitement and enthusiasm. And that's good, right? Or you talk to your prospects or customers about the idea or your investors or your, whatever it is, right? That's not the same as having others who have no stake in this at all, except wanting the best for you.
Yeah.
And where a group can really help is not just in, giving you feedback, but is, helping you through the challenges you're facing in life and in business, right? Like this is the safe place to talk about what's really going on in the business, but can also be a place to celebrate your big wins, right? As entrepreneurs, we've always got that mountain of stuff to do in front of us. We've always got that next peak, that next mountaintop. It's really easy to lose sight of all the things we've accomplished. And so to have others there to remind us about that and to celebrate those big wins with us like nobody else can is so, so important. So in terms of the vetting, to your question, we do have an application process. We do review the application with the prospective member. And then a really important thing I recommend folks look for is the ability to test drive or try a group out, right? We've found that, the prospect of handing over a significant size check to join a group sight unseen, not only is like not the savviest move for you, as a business owner, it's a huge leap of faith. It's also not fair to the group, right? The bar to get into a group shouldn't be that your credit card clears and that you can fog a mirror, right? You should be a good fit for the group and the group should be a good fit for you. So that's why we do a test drive, and that gives folks a chance to experience a group and the group to experience the prospective member. After that, we debrief, and then we're separately looking for approval from the group and from the member. So if we find that folks aren't willing to participate, if they're not open-minded to hearing what others are saying, right? If they're not willing to be vulnerable within the group, if they're not willing to share what's going on and so on, like these are some of those flags that we look for. And those things do come up. If you're not open to receiving constructive criticism from others, then what are you looking for from the group, right? So that's why, those are some of the things that we screen for.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, when you first started your very, very first mastermind group, how hard was that? Was it easy because you were able to reach into the business community that you'd already knew? You have any people with objections? Wayne, what is this?
So I was a member of different groups for years before I started facilitating and running my own groups, right?
Yeah.
And during that time, it was really interesting to see the different kinds of groups that are out there. And that's really what helped me to figure out what I thought was the best model, right? And this has evolved over time. One of our core values is around Kaizen, this continuous never-ending improvement. So we experiment, we try new things, and what we like, we keep, and what doesn't work, we get rid of, right? It's an iterative process over the years, right? So on one end of the spectrum, you have, what I call like your high-end destination groups, right? These, you're writing like a 6 or maybe a 5-figure check every single year just to be in that group a few times a year, right? You're usually leaving the family, the office, and, everything that you know behind for a week. You're in the, 2, maybe a little more of full mastermind days with maybe 20 to 30 folks. And that's great, but you're only meeting maybe 2 or 3 times a year. That means if you can't make one of those meetings, right, not only does it dramatically increase the overall cost, but it also means by the time you get back there, your business may be in a drastically different place. Other folks may have sold a business, launched a new business, like you're looking at a totally different about face, right? So there's just a number of challenges there. That being said, those groups were always really valuable to me. So there is value in them. Just be aware of sort of some of those downsides, right? The other end of the spectrum is there's what I call like your accountability groups, your coffee shop groups. You might hop on a Zoom call once a week or meet up with some folks locally. And those are valuable. And these are anywhere from like free to maybe $100 a month. The challenge is that in a 7-day period, not a whole lot can dramatically change in a business that you have new things to talk about. Secondly, or B on this, is that you generally have so little skin in the game that turnover can be high. Anything that comes up in people's lives might just be more important than showing up for a meeting, right? So you don't always have the highest show rate or consistency of people who are going to be there, right? And then also just the caliber of who's in that room, they may not be where you want to be in terms of right sizing the group for you. So the sweet spot that we found is really in the middle. And that's a once a month meeting where we meet for a full day to really deep dive into the business. That 1 month window between meetings is enough time to really implement bigger picture things in the business, start seeing a result and report back, right? You can do a lot in a month, right? But not so much that the business is gone and new business is launched like you'd have with some of those bigger groups, right? So it's sort of just that right size. And the one day gives us enough time to really deeper dive into each member's business. Whereas if you're meeting once a week for, 30, 60 minutes, you really can't deep dive that while you're talking typically very topical or just accountability level items. You're not really getting to the heart of what's going on. So that's where I found that really good sweet spot. And in terms of, getting folks together, like for our listeners who are looking to start their own groups or put things together, like reach out to your community, reach out to the people you're already doing this with and invite them. Right? I've had informal mastermind groups or one-off mastermind groups over the years as well, where it's a matter of reaching out and handpicking the people you want to be in the room with you and inviting them. And more often than not, I've had more yeses than nos to an invite of getting together to do just that.
Yeah. So these are in-person retreats?
Yeah, I've found those far more valuable than Zoom. I mean, with the pandemic, we were sort of forced overnight to shift to a virtual model, and our existing members still thrived and did well with that. But it also allowed us to extend that reach out, and people who previously weren't going to travel out could join us virtually.
Okay.
And so, that model, has stuck around. We still have folks who prefer virtual. Even some folks who are local prefer that virtual option. But for me personally, like sitting in front of, a Zoom call all day versus being in person with folks is like, is night and day.
Yeah, absolutely. The iteration that comes out, the ideation, the creative energy of just being in the same room with somebody. I work virtually for pretty much everything I do. Yeah. But when we do have those in-persons, it's refreshing at this point, right?
Yeah.
It's something.
And if nothing else, like it's a physically different space away from the day-to-day of the business, right? Your team is not there, right? The phones aren't ringing. Customers aren't walking in. that you're not looking at your desk of stuff. It's whatever your normal work environment is. This is meant to be a place away from that, right? Where you can truly just focus on working on the business instead of the usual day-to-day work in the business.
Right. Yeah. And I was going to ask about location because you are Bay Area mastermind. And so I was wondering, how do you continue to scale if that's one of your goals? And do you have different circles? Do you have one group running it, or do you have different groups and you match people based on their skill sets or their types of businesses?
Yeah, matching is really important. And it was interesting earlier in our conversation, you were mentioning about like the incubator groups, more for earlier stage startups and all. We would attract over the years people earlier stage in their business, even though our group was exclusively for established businesses looking to scale, right? And we would always, we appreciated the interest and, I was happy to provide some direction and resources to folks. But the prospective business owner or early stage startup was at such a different place than an established business. And, we couldn't have those two groups overlapping. And, interestingly, what we found is that when you're an established business owner and you're getting together with other established business owners, you're sharing what you're working on, what's working, what's not working, and so forth, right? Everyone learns from that. When you're an earlier stage or first-time founder, you're asking a lot more how do I questions,
right?
Because it's all new to you. You're not doing it yet and you want to get going, right? So whereas our members in our group might be sharing around an ad campaign they were running that was working really well and a new product that they were launching and how that launch went and what they learned from that, right? And this kind of stuff. An earlier stage founder would be asking questions like, what kind of entity should I be forming? Or how can I find new customers? Or how does this online AdWords work, right? So it's much more looking for direction and answers than sharing what they're actively doing that's valuable to all, right? So that led us to actually create a community for our founders, right? So that is, obviously it costs less, it's less of a time commitment, right? And it's that different circle like you were touching on. So that allowed us to go in exactly that direction.
Yeah, nice. So you had a specific avatar, but then because you're attracting other people who saw something that they wanted, you were able to expand.
Yeah, and this is actually a common thread that, that folks I work with, this comes up a lot, right? Is knowing who your ideal customer or client is, right? Having that avatar of them, giving them a name, right? Being able to write and talk to them directly, especially for newer business owners, that can sometimes be a scary prospect because what they're seeing is that FOMO, that fear of these other people who might find them and having to say no to that work, right? And as you and I and our listeners know, that's actually the opposite of how it goes, that as you dial and niche in, you attract far more, right? And you can now command a higher price. You're offering a higher value by niching for just them. And look, if other clients come along that don't fit your avatar, no one's saying you can't work with them, right? You can also refer them out. You can also create a separate product line or brand or, solution that better fits them and speak just to them. Those are all possible ways of addressing that while still niching down to your ideal client.
Yeah. You run masterminds, but I know one of the things you talked about was the dream for all entrepreneurs of being able to go take those vacations, walk away from our business, know it's still going to exist. Have you been able to find that balance for yourself?
Yeah. So, when I look back way earlier on, I had a business where, this was in the early days of cell phones and, I had my phone with me and I was out on the date. I was out on one of my earlier dates with this amazing woman who I was getting to know. And I was sort of like, half tuned into the cell phone of what might be going on. And again, this is like pre-apps and notifications and all. It was like texts and calls. But I was kind of half tuned into what my clients might be needing me for. And at some point, this is, earlier dates. So it's the getting to know each other conversations, right? I looked down and I'm like, well, what am I doing? And it was almost like in that moment, I realized, no, like this is after hours. I'm sitting across the table from this incredible person I'm getting to know. And that's where my focus should be. And so that was when I started establishing this idea of like, working hours versus not. And wouldn't you know, like my clients adjusted to that very quickly and easily. And, here we are, decades later, and, that's my wife, right? That's who I was able to fully tune into and, and we have an incredible life together because of that decision of separating out this, working 90 hours a week idea, right? So that was sort of one of those first moments. But then later on, as we were starting our family, I shared the news with my team that we were expecting. And, in 6 months, we'd be, welcoming a baby into our family. And, of course, I got all the congratulations and excitement and all that. And most of the team I had were more experienced than I was in many areas of business, life, and so on, which, like, side note, that's a good pro tip for our listeners, like, hire people smarter than you, right? And so many were already parents. And so they asked me, like, how much time I was planning to take off. And I hadn't really considered it. I'm just used to, working on my own schedule, my own terms. And I figured, yeah, like I'll be around. And if it weren't for my team, I might have done just that. But no, they were older and wiser and encouraged me that I should, take some time off. Yeah. So we settled on I'd take 3 months off. And that was meant to be like truly offline time away from the business. And we had a 6-month runway. And my team turned around and they gave me a list and said, these are the systems we need that we don't currently have. These are the hires we want to make, right? This is the information only that we need to know. And we had a 6-month runway to do that. And we did. And so I was able to truly unplug for 3 months and be there with my wife and our newborn baby girl and not worry about anything else in the world besides being present and being there for that time, which I'll never get back, right? None of us can ever get that time in our lives back again. And so a few years later, when my son came along, we repeated the process again. This past summer, we just unplugged as a family and we traveled for 9 weeks and I was able to be offline during that time as well. So like, this is the kind of thing you can do when you put the right systems and people in place and you follow the framework of moving from a solopreneur to being a true business owner. Now, just a word of caution for our listeners. I'm not implying in any way that the dream is to be on a desert island with, drinks and umbrellas. Like, that's not my dream. That's not my happy place. And I love the work that I do. And I love that I get to play this game of business all the time. Right. So it's great to love what you do and you should do that. Right. And if working 60 hours a week is satisfying, you should do that. Right. But when you have the optionality, it means you can take time off to work with the causes that are most important to you. It means you can volunteer more. It means you can spend more time in your community, spend more time with your family, spend more time launching a new business, right? If it weren't for my businesses being able to be on autopilot over time, I wouldn't have been able to launch many of the other businesses I have been that required more of a time investment upfront. So the point is that as you grow your business through a systematic process, it gives you that choice of what you do with your time. And that is so, so powerful.
Yeah. I'm a single mom of a teenager who, we're going through the college process. And so it's very important to me that whatever I do, that the people I'm surrounded with understand that she's my priority. I'm going to only have her at home for another 1.5 years. Then she's going to be gone, possibly overseas. And so it is really important to have that time. We don't get that time back with our children or our families.
No.
But I love that that's one of your core values.
Yeah, I'd heard a story, I forget where I heard this from years ago, about this parent who sat down with, I think that a preteen to teen, and they were having some conflict about whatever. And they sat down and like, the dad takes out these 2 napkins and he's like, this napkin, is the path of your life from start to finish. He's like, and this napkin is mine. And he overlaps them. He's like, we have this overlapping time together. Like there's this whole part of my lifeline that was before you existed. And you're going to have a whole part of your lifeline after I'm no longer here. But we've got this shared time together. So like, let's make the most of that. And that's like a really powerful visual, I always thought. But then I also read some statistic that it's like 80 or 90% of the time that we'll have with our kids is in this like, pre 18 years old. And that after that, they're off living somewhere else, running their life and, too busy for us. We all know the songs and stories about this stuff, right? So, why wouldn't we want to make the most of the time we do have, right? When our kids were younger, I remember, you meet other parents and have play dates and that kind of stuff. And we met this couple who had a younger kiddo as well. This was still a kid like in a car seat carrier, right? Months old. And they hand us the kid's business card.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Calling card. This is, yeah.
It was a calling card for the kid. It had the parents' numbers, but more important, like the nanny's phone number. And they're like, yeah, like, they want to set up play dates and stuff for the kid. And so I got talking with them because I was just tickled by this idea of having a calling card for the kids, right? But it ends up that both parents were attorneys working crazy hours. They hated their career and their work, but like, law school's not cheap. And so they were looking at this, both working careers they absolutely hated, and they had no time as a family. But they did the math and they said, look, this is 5 years, right? we get through this 5 years and then they're set. They can unplug, have the financial numbers figured out, and then they can be present with their kid. And I thought that was interesting, but I'm also looking at that saying, like, here's this kid who won't know you for 5.5 years. And then you're going to swoop in and just hope to pick up the pieces with a kid you don't even know, right? Compared with being able to, drip that out earlier and have that time earlier on. So I'm not saying there's a right or a wrong here, right? But follow your heart, do what you feel is right. But ideally, you have optionality and you're able to create a situation where you have a choice. So you can decide how you want to spend that time. Not that it's being forced on you by a job, an employer, or, a business that is an all-consuming job.
Yeah. And I had both, right? So you have your business where I've learned when I am talking about my own business, my daughter now asks me questions. Who are you meeting with today? Who are you interviewing? What are you talking about? What inspired you today? And it's really cool to see her interest.
Love those questions. That's so great.
Yeah. And on the other side, I have had full-time jobs where people didn't have the same situation. Maybe they weren't parents themselves and didn't understand that I'm going to take time in the middle of the day to pick up my daughter from school, to get her to activities. I can do a Zoom from her tennis practice or whatever.
Right.
I can do whatever I need to do, but she's my priority. And you can take it or leave it, which is why you kind of always go back to either finding, a job that kind of gives you that entrepreneurial time and has lots of parents, or you go and do your own thing, which is, I think, when a lot of entrepreneurs have that push-pull of like, do I have this, or do I go back to what I really love and make sure that I have time to be happy and to fit all these other things in? And one thing, go ahead. And then I want to ask you about the philanthropy side, because you said one of the things you did say was then you have time to volunteer and do other activities.
So I was just going to touch on earlier, you mentioned about, if your daughter, is going to be overseas, right? And doing exchange programs or studying abroad and so on. When my wife and I met, she had done exchange programs during high school, spent a year, her senior year of high school abroad, 2 summers abroad through exchange programs. And that's not something I had done. And, in her 3rd year of college, as we're getting to the start of her 4th year, she sat me down for an important conversation. We've been dating for a number of years. And she let me know that there was this really prestigious and competitive scholarship she was looking at getting. But she probably wouldn't get it because it was really competitive and hard to get. But if she did get it, then after graduation, she'd be overseas for a year teaching there, and she probably shouldn't do it. And so she sort of looked up at me with the looking for my thoughts. And so my first question was asking, where we would live, what country we'd be and what that would be like, and so on. And she looks up at me and she's like, "You'd come with me?" I'm like, "Well, of course." Right. And so she was expecting to have to make this decision of pursue prestigious, difficult to get scholarship and leave boyfriend behind, right? Or continue a relationship. And that was a difficult decision, and had no idea that there was a possibility where these two things could coexist. That was only possible because I had my own business that we were able to, and spoiler, she of course got the scholarship. And we moved to Europe for a year and got to live there and travel around for a whole year while I ran things from 6 time zones ahead. And, many of my clients had no idea that was going on. When I was doing press and media interviews and things like that, they had no idea, where in the world we were, and that didn't matter, right? The point is that, we're still able to run things and do things on our own schedule. And that was an incredible year that I don't know when else in one's life you get to do that kind of thing. And I'm so glad we were able to jump in and do it. If I had just a job, that would have been a very different conversation. And I'm so lucky that, entrepreneurship was able to provide that kind of opportunity.
Yeah. That's really amazing and beautiful and inspiring. It's something I've been thinking a lot about. So we'll have to definitely have some offline conversations. But
I'd love to, for sure.
I do want to hear, because philanthropy is obviously, it's in your LinkedIn profile. It's something that's very important to you. So how has this freedom also helped you achieve those goals of volunteering, with your family or for organizations that you really feel invested in?
Yeah. So it's interesting. Impact has been something that's always been really important to me. Right. And one of the wonderful things that business does for us is it gives us the tools to provide impact in the world, right? Not just through our services and the customers we help, right? Not just through the jobs that we're able to provide and provide a paycheck and employment and such for others, right? These are all wonderful parts of having a business. It also gives us a lot of tools to give back and help out in the community and world at large, and the freedom of time and money to do so. So a number of years ago, There's an organization called 1% for the Planet, launched by, Yvon Chouinard and the folks at Patagonia. Mm-hmm. And the whole idea was Patagonia sort of led the charge on this. But the idea was, instead of just saying that you're a company that gives a part of your profits to something, 1% for the planet, the whole idea was, how do we get companies to give 1% of gross, like 1% of gross sales, right? Forget the profit side, gross sales, to impactful causes that can help out the world. Now, we'd already been doing that for a long time. My companies have long had a number of causes we've supported, and this was just a really interesting way to formalize that and become part of that community. So that was really impactful to be able to do that, because a lot of the causes that we support are in alignment with this idea of entrepreneurial freedom. And so one of the organizations that, I've loved supporting for quite a while is a group called Village Enterprise. And their whole mission, and my gosh, we could talk for hours about them, right? But as an organization, they are helping in sub-Saharan Africa families get out of extreme poverty, right? We're talking like, sub-dollar a day living, right? Get themselves out of extreme poverty and solve generational poverty through entrepreneurship. So not only do they provide education and resources and tools and guidance and mentorship and all of that, but the success rates are phenomenal. 3 out of 4 of the businesses that start are still in business years and years and years later. Contrast that to like the US or anywhere else, right? These businesses stay successful. The businesses spawn new businesses. Each business directly financially takes 21 people out of extreme poverty, right? And they have hundreds of thousands of businesses that have been starting through their program, right? And there was a third party, I forget the terminology for it, when you do a study where it's like, randomly double blind, all this and that. And they compared a ton of different methodologies of, do you just give money? Do you provide loans? Do you provide just this, just that? Their program outperformed everything else out there in this third party thing. And this is not a new idea. This is an organization that's been around since the early 80s, right? And, they have brought over 2 million people out of extreme poverty through this program. And it's just outstanding. So, that's just one of many great organizations I've loved working with and supporting over the years. And you were talking about the great conversations you're having around the dinner table with your daughter about what's going on in your day and the work you're doing. My wife and I had this really interesting realization that, our kids were growing up in a household where we did things, where we support great causes, where we talk about our investments and things we're doing, but we weren't including them in that conversation because like they were little kids. And so over the last many years, we've actually made a really intentional shift that when we're looking at investments, we talk about it as a family, right? We bring the kids in to go over financials and review it and ask questions and tell them our thought process. When we're going to, galas and donor appreciation events and things like that for the causes that are important to us, we invite the kids and ask if they'd like to join us to be part of that as well. And they have been. And it's been really cool for them to see, with wide eyes, what's going on in the world and where we're all making a difference. And that I thought was a really interesting shift over the past few years that I've been really happy about is including them more in those conversations and in seeing the impact firsthand.
Okay. We're definitely going to have further conversations about all of this because I do have a nonprofit that works in Ghana. And I also have involved my daughter from an early age with the same kinds of things. So we'll save that for another episode. Just an offline conversation. But I think what I really want listeners or viewers to understand is that all of these things are things that you've been able to build into your life because you've built up your businesses so that you have that freedom. And you've created these opportunities for masterminds with your coaching, with your consulting for other entrepreneurs to do the same thing and to make it maybe a less onerous process than we would think it is, right?
Well, this entrepreneurial journey, is not something you need to go out alone, right? There are others on this journey who are seeing successes and failures and taking lessons away, right? And who want to share that with you, right? So don't go at this alone. Surround yourself by others who are also on this journey and we all grow together. We all learn from each other and it's so, so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. Immensely powerful. Oh my gosh. And I know you're writing a book.
Yes.
We're just going to tease a little bit because I understand it doesn't have a name yet, but do you want to tell us a little bit about the concept and can we go to your website, Bay Area Mastermind, to learn more?
Yeah. So bayareamastermind.com/book has more info on that already for folks who are curious. But at a high level, I'm a dot connector. I love seeing the patterns between things and then figuring out, how do we repeat that pattern for success or avoid that pattern for failure and so on. And so that helps me to develop different frameworks that we can use for decision-making or for planning or, for whatever it is in business life and so on. So one of those structures we found is there's, sort of 3 key levers I've found that you can adjust in your business that all lead to increasing the profitability in the business, right? Not just the gross sales, but also the profitability, right? So by adjusting any one of these levers, we can improve one of those 3 variables. And what I think is so interesting, for our math listeners, is that when you have an incremental improvement in a certain area, right? That's not an additive improvement. It's a multiplicative. So what I mean by that is if you have a 10% improvement of something, right? That's a percentage improvement over your base number, right? It's not just adding on a fixed number, right? It's percentage based, right? But if we do that a few times, right? This goes back to, Warren Buffett talks about like the 8th wonder of the world is compounding interest, right? These numbers compound on each other. So a 10% improvement and a 10% improvement and a 10% improvement is not 30%. You don't add those 10%, right? It's actually multiplicative, to 1.1 times 1.1 times 1.1. So when we make small changes, we have these small hinges that swing big doors, right? So if you look at, there's a story I love about the British cycling team. As an avid cyclist myself and as a businessy guy, like the overlaps are uncanny, right? But the British cycling team was doing terrible. And they brought in a new head coach who started looking at these different leading indicators of success and started running all these rapid experiments, looking for little 1% improvements. That's all they needed is a little 1% improvement. But what they found is over the course of a season, by adding little 1% improvements, those have that same multiplicative effect. And you can close that gap on how far behind they were as a team to become an incredible team, right? And so we're able to do the same thing in business through a framework and approach that I have to adjust these little levers in your business that add on new revenue streams, increase revenue streams, and so on, that lets you get unstuck and not just increase gross revenues, but increase the profitability as well.
Wow. Fantastic. Well, I can't wait to read it. And we'll have to have you on when it's out so that we can talk about it and get some more of your, because we didn't get into all your case studies as much because there's just, honestly, I think we could talk for hours and you would have a lot to share that would be really helpful to the audience. So I thank you for that. So we've given the website name. We'll put it in the show notes along with some other links so that people can find out about joining one of your groups, find out about the book, your coaching, consulting. Is there one big piece of advice you'd want to impart on anybody listening or watching this episode?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that with 2 pieces of advice because I think they go together and they're almost contrary, right? So first, entrepreneurship isn't for everyone, right? Like should be for us like weirdos. It shouldn't just be because you saw a video online about business and think you should start a business. It's not for everyone, right? There's a lot of benefits to having a job and having employment and doing all those things, right? But if you are going to go down that path, it is incredible, right? And you can do it. And my second piece of advice is that you don't need to go at it alone, right? Surround yourself with others on that journey, right? If the only people you talk to and hang out with have a job, they don't have the most valuable input to you on how to grow your business, right? If all the folks you hang around with are just people who want to start a business but aren't doing it, that's not going to help move you forward. Surround yourself by people who are on that journey, who are on that entrepreneurial path, right? And share those wins, right? Share those failures and the lessons learned, right? Share the challenges and realize that it's a much more enjoyable journey when you're on that journey with others as well.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate, we were talking before the show that everything happens when it's supposed to happen. And one of those things is that it does usually take people a long time to get interviewed for my show, which I'm grateful that people want to come on the show and share their advice. But I also know that when you do come on and we get to have this conversation, it's probably perfect timing for me to learn what I need to learn from you, probably perfect time for my audience to learn what they need. And also with the growth of the podcast, it's a great time for you as well to get your message out to even more people. So
I don't know, have you had this experience before, our listeners as well, where, you reach over to grab that book off the shelf that you read years ago and you give it a reread? And like you're scratching your head and you're like, who came in the middle of the night and put that new chapter in that wasn't here last time? Because that's exactly what I needed right now.
Yeah.
Right. So whatever books you've read, like they're worth a reread, the good ones, because there are pieces in there that didn't apply to you in your life and your business at the time you read it that have a whole new world of meaning to you right now, right? When you're listening to a podcast episode and there are pieces that don't apply to you right now or the message doesn't resonate, like you give it a re-listen and you find that's exactly what you needed to hear right then and there. But you only get that when you reread your books, you read new books, you listen to podcast episodes and so on. So can our listeners continue being lifelong learners, continue listening to this podcast and others, continue to grow.
Yeah. Well, and on that, do you have a favorite quote, mantra, family motto, verse, poem, words that keep you going and keep you inspired every day?
The one that comes to mind, can be transferred across lots of things. I mentioned, being an avid cyclist. I also just love the outdoors and the mountains. And John Muir had this great quote about, the mountains are calling and I must go.
Yes.
Right. So
oh gosh, I love that one.
I love that. It's wonderful. I have that emblazoned on a water bottle of mine. I got it, custom done, which is great. Our kids' road IDs for their cycling, have that on there. It's impactful. But whatever it is that is calling to you, whatever that passion is, whatever draws you in, right? It can be okay to pursue that. You can find your purpose, find your mission and get it and go after it. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, right? It doesn't mean you're not going to have some setbacks or challenges on the way, but, understand why you're doing it.
Yeah. Amazing. Fantastic. Well, I know I'm coming away inspired and I will definitely be re-listening to this episode as a listener instead of the interviewer so that I can pick up all the things that I may have missed as well. So Jeremy Shapiro, Bay Area Mastermind, thank you so much for being here, offering your wisdom, your expertise, and just encouraging us all to keep on this journey, keep getting a little better every day, find the people that we're supposed to be surrounded with to help us understand what we don't understand, get to that next level, be able to have that freedom and flexibility to spend time with our families or travel or whatever it is that you dream of doing outside of the world of work.
Yeah.
And to everybody's watching this episode or listening to it, please leave us a rating review. Send me an email or message through LinkedIn. Let me know your thoughts. And I'll be back again with another amazing guest to share their journey, their story, and some inspiration. Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbrangamplified.com.